Hello.
Hi.
I would need to introduce you in this session to my colleague Kath from Relate, because she's going to be sharing this session, which is a question and answer session based on issues people have raised with us on living well with autism. And Kath is a self-diagnosed counsellor on the spectrum. She says she understood this for the first time about 15 years ago. And she works with autistic clients and presents the groups with the Living Well with Autism, as I do. She's also got a son, age 14, who's diagnosed on the spectrum, and this has given her the broad view, which is most useful to share in our groups. So each question I'm going to share with Kath, and you'll hear the understanding from the other side of the divide, as it were. So we're starting with the question, what books can we recommend for people to read for themselves? My first recommendation is a book called Aspergirls by Rudy Simone. That's Simon with an E on the end. I'm putting this first because the diagnosis of female Asperger's syndrome is still lagging behind the diagnosis of the male version. And this is a book which brings together lots of female experiences and has a list of female AS traits at the end, which is extremely useful, plus lots of advice on female self-management. So for women, this is a great starting point. And another book that I recommend very often is called Neurodiverse Relationships, edited by Joanna Pike. That's Pike with an I. It's a book where partners who are on different sides of the AS divide share their account of their relationships, and we get to see the same issues from two sides. It's wonderfully illuminating, a really good read. So that was Neurodiverse Relationships by Joanna Pike. Now I'm turning to Kath for her recommendations. Kath, what would you say?
Yeah, hi Felicity. I would recommend Been There, Done That, Now Try This, edited by Tony Atwood and others. It's a really good book that has brought together lots of experience of many Aspergers and how they've each managed the challenges of the condition, ranging from anxiety to self-esteem, depression and career. So it gives you lots of different ways of managing it, so you can choose whichever one feels right for you. So I think it's a really good book that gives lots of different solutions to the challenges that we all have on the spectrum. The second book that I would recommend is one for children, the age range being 6 to 12 on this book, and it's called What to Do When Your Brain Gets Stuck, and that's by Dawn Hubner. And it's all about OCD, but it explains in stories about how the brain gets stuck with thoughts, and then it gives a step-by-step instruction manual to help master the thoughts. It's a really helpful book for younger people.
Excellent, thanks, Kath. Next question. My AS husband's obsessional hobby gets in the way of our family life. Can he control it? Over to you, Kath.
Okay. And that's a really tricky one because obsessions often bring lots of happiness. So the person on the spectrum is quite reluctant to give it up, which is understandable. So there are ways that, he can learn to manage it better, but he might need your help to do that. So first of all, it is talking openly about the impact that it's having on yourself and the family. The second thing that I would try is to do a very visual chart to show just how much time he is spending on the obsession, and try and come up with ways of reducing the amount of time that he does that. And a way to do that would be if, for example, he spent 3 hours a day on his obsession, then agree by saying, over the next few weeks, can we try reducing that to 2.5 hours a day? You might both need to set alarms for the 2.5 hours so that you're both aware that's the time up. And if you do that for about a month, and then a month later, you could try reducing it to 2 hours, okay? If it's an obsession that is creating difficulties over money, which often it can do, then you have to agree a spending limit. So really it's about how you two as a couple communicate with each other, and that's often the tricky bit.
Lovely, thanks, Kath. Yeah, I've got two thoughts. One is, it might be possible to make it work for you, the neurotypical partner. You could say those 3 hours, create a kind of 3-hour space for your hobby or your personal happiness, which might be meeting with friends or going out to do something completely different. So making it the basis of a kind of fair exchange might have some appeal, not least because people on the spectrum have such a strong sense of fairness. The other thing is possibly seeing if there's a way of getting involved.
Yeah.
I did work with a family where they agreed all to be crazy about one American baseball team. They all wore the gear and watched the games. It created a kind of shared family zone, which was very good for the family's sense of unity and for their humour and their sense of what was worth doing. So if there's any way in at all to sharing an obsession, even as some kind of small part of it, it's worth exploring. Give it a go. Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. I agree with that.
Okay.
Yeah,
thanks.
That's really good. If you can't beat them, join them.
Yeah, quite. Next question. Any advice on handling meltdowns? Again, over to you, Kath.
Okay. Yeah, meltdowns are really difficult for both parties involved, and they really drain people of energy. What I would suggest, if it's an adult, then it might be up to the neurotypical person to acknowledge the emotion that they see being expressed. So it might be anger, it might be sadness, but just to say, it looks like you're feeling really angry or anxious or sad. Perhaps we need a bit of time out. So time out is really important. Suggest something relaxing, like going for a walk or just sitting listening to music. Don't engage in an argument with them, because it will just escalate and make the meltdown even stronger. And try not to lecture them over anything. Look for some triggers. If you can see any triggers, let them know when you see the triggers, because often the person on the spectrum isn't aware of the triggers, and it can come like a bolt out of the blue for all parties. So if you can identify the triggers, that's really helpful. If it's children, then try and use distraction tactics, because that can often help. Again, time out, get them to go to their room, give them a safe place where they can go, or, you leave and give them time out. And again, get them to do something relaxing, where it might be listening to music in their bedroom, it might be getting them to have a bath, anything that relaxes and brings things down to a norm.
Yeah, great. I would second all that and add the thought that one obvious trigger for meltdowns is unexpected change, isn't it? It's being suddenly confronted with something which can't be avoided but which wasn't expected. This is a real invitation to catastrophe. And so one of the things I often encourage in families is that they have a big wall calendar on which everything gets marked that's going to be important. So nobody can say they didn't see something coming. And that, obviously, the big things are holidays, but the small things are changes of somebody else picking you up at the end of school, or an unexpected day off work or whatever. Those things need to be made visible, and if not on a wall chart, then a whiteboard near the door is often a great thing for putting up short-term messages and leaving them there while they're valid, and then wiping them off to show that we've moved on. It's all about making unspoken assumptions visible. And in families where one or several people are on the spectrum and others aren't, the most contentious hidden trap is that the people, the neurotypical people, have a steady sense of what they're anticipating, what the future holds. And people on the spectrum, by and large, don't. So they feel ambushed and wronged very quickly. So they need the maximum chance to engage with the way life's going to unfold. And I'm afraid that falls to the lot of the neurotypical person, really, because their brain stores that information and holds on to it in a much more efficient way. So I'm all for the wall chart, the whiteboard, or basically post-its, any little sticky piece of paper with a message on it is a blessing to a person on the spectrum who's constantly losing track of something as soon as they concentrate on something else. The thing which they perhaps needed to be aware of floats off because their attention has been grabbed by something new. And that puts them at a great disadvantage in the flow of time and in the organisation of something as complex as modern family life, which is often a bit like running the army, isn't it?
Absolutely, they're really good suggestions, Felicity, and anything visual is really, really helpful, yeah.
Okay, another question for you, Kath. My recently diagnosed partner keeps saying he's autistic, so he can't help himself. And where does that leave me?
Okay. That's a tricky one. A diagnosis of autism is not an excuse for unacceptable behaviour, for a start, okay? Change is possible, but it might be a lot slower than what a neurotypical person would be able to do. So we're looking at a time frame here. Focus on the things that you want to change and do things one at a time, because if you try and ask him to change lots of different things, then you will get the answer as, I'm autistic and I can't help it, because he'll feel like there's too much there and he'll feel overloaded. So focus on one change at a time. Be clear about what you do want him to do. Okay, so anything that he does do that's positive, tell him that's positive. That's the sort of thing I need you to do. And be clear about what will happen if the unacceptable behaviour continues. So, if there's something particularly that you really cannot bear, then you've got to tell him and give him solutions as to what he could do differently. So it's quite difficult, but it's not impossible to make changes. And I guess at the end of the day, you've got a choice of whether or not you stay or go, whether it's the real deal breaker or not.
Yeah, thanks, Kath. I often point neurotypical partners to a website called Different Together, which is for couples across the neurotypical AS divide, trying to hang together, but recognising the difference and working with it. And it's great to know that you've got company if you're a neurotypical partner who feels the diagnosis has put them at a huge disadvantage. That from now on things will never be fair. That's a horrible implication. And it's good to know that other women, or sometimes it's men with autistic female partners, that other partners have been in the same dilemma and have had to come up with some new solutions like the ones you're giving, Kath. The big thing, which I also share when people are newly diagnosed, is that the remark, "I'm autistic, so that's how I am," is only one early phase of the adjustment to the diagnosis. It's a bit like saying, "I've had a shock, I've only now understood who I am." It's not a categorical unwillingness to change. It's more like, "Gosh, look at my label." And it's followed by often an upsurge of autistic behaviour, because the person on the spectrum feels free at last to be who they are. And that involves not masking anymore. And for them, it's a huge relief. It can be alarming for the partner because they think it's only got worse, but actually the person on the spectrum is feeling authentic for the first time. And that's very precious, because their energy isn't going down the plug hole anymore. And that tends to give way to another phase, which is self-acceptance. This is how I am. And as people achieve that self-acceptance, they do actually relax into forms of behaviour which are much less autistic. They have body relaxation, so they have fewer signs of agitation, and they have mental relaxation, so their brain is more used to them, and they can actually seem more neurotypical after the diagnosis eventually than you would have thought possible. But it's a long journey, integrating the understanding and developing new forms of behaviour. And the neurotypical partner needs a lot of patience as those changes work through. We can only say that we have seen wonderful changes, and that time is a great thing in the management of autism, as I've stressed in previous talks. So that's all we've got time for today, but thanks hugely, Kath, for your input. And this is where we both say goodbye to our viewers. This is the end of our five videos to substitute for the Living Well with Autism course, which we can't currently run in Derbyshire. Thank you, everybody who's been watching. Bye-bye.